people who are not the speaker, please
it comes to Russia.
mute themselves. I hear some, thank you very much. Okay, so here we go. Let me welcome Manchi again. She has a background in coastal ecology, and she's particularly interested in how abiotic factors affect ecosystem engineers and foundation species, and how this is driving spatial patterns and resilience in tidal ecosystems. She's using a combination of field experiments and theoretical and numerical models, and also some remote sensing. So a really broad field here. Yeah, as I mentioned, she's currently a postdoc at University of Oxford, and I'm really looking forward to hear her presentation today.
Okay, shall I share my screen now?
Yes, please.
First off, thanks for the kind introduction by Stephanie. So as many of you have already know, the importance of coastal ecosystems to human beings and our properties. Today I'm going to talk more about some foundation species that is crucially important for the salt marshes and the coastal marshes. As many of you know, the salt marshes, the foundation species in coastal marshes are mostly the pioneering plant species that change the environment and then allow more species come in and settle down in coastal area. And normally it's very stressful conditions for a lot of species. And marsh plants also play an important role in defending the coastal marshes from storms, from sea level rise, and provide a crucial habitat for other organisms. And with climate, it can change a lot of things, like sea level, the sea level, and also the precipitation that we already observe a lot of extreme climate events that affect the coastal marshes in the past decades. And today in my presentation, I will touch on three topics. The first is what determines the plant distribution in coastal marshes and how marsh plants perform under extreme climate events and under sea level rise. As many of you already know, marsh plants are governed by a couple of different biotic and abiotic factors, like physical environment and other, organism in other trophic level. If I provide this diagram to you and ask you guys to fill out the most important element you think is relevant in governing the distribution of marsh plants, what would you feel that? Think about that, and I will show you how I feel that. So the physical environment, I list the physical environment and plant attributes, as well as some organism from other trophic levels that affect the distribution of marsh plants. But you might have your own answer, but I hope the factors I listed here are relevant to most of you. So because it's covered by this presentation. And I will start from plant attributes. As we know, marsh plants have very diverse stress tolerance. Some species are very tolerant to like a high salinity level, and some are very tolerant to floodings and long inundation, long period of inundation. And some species might be less stress tolerant, but they are very competitive. So the first attributes I want to talk about is the competitive ability and the stress tolerance of plants and how it determines their spatial distribution. So according to a study conducted by Crane in salt marshes in the United States, it studied a group of dominant species across the elevation gradient and find out the species, the key dominant physical factors that affect plant distribution is salinity, and some species are quite salt tolerant, and some are less salt tolerant. But when we look at how they distribute in the field, we find that the stress tolerant species, that is a salt tolerant species in that marshes that study, is less competitive to the stress intolerant species. So there's a trade-off between the competitive ability and the stress tolerance most of the marsh plants present. So at the benign conditions, normally it's the most competitive species colonize there. And the stress tolerant species, but less competitive compared to other species, can only survive, can only colonize the stressful conditions. And then from the interspecific interaction level, so we can say like in the red region, in the red rectangle, the interspecific interaction is mostly competition. And in the yellow rectangle, like the stressful conditions, the interspecific interaction could be competitive, competition, or facilitation. And which interaction dominant is a fascinating question for ecologists and also for marsh managers who want to use like the facilitation to restore some of the degraded marshes. According to the stress gradient hypothesis proposed by Bernays in 1994, it's saying in benign conditions the competition dominant, but with the increase of stress level, interspecific facilitation dominate and it's continue increase. But since this hypothesis was proposed in 1990s, and over the next several decades, there are a lot of studies have tested if the stress gradient hypothesis is right or wrong, and a lot of observation find facilitation sometimes collapse at stressful conditions, and sometimes even does not appear. So what dominates drive the different observations across different studies? That is some topic I studied during my PhD stage. And what we did is we studied we chose a study area in China in the Yellow River estuary. And in that system, the plant distribution is governed by the inundation and also by the salinity. And the plants, the interaction between plants can be plants can be facilitated by their neighboring species by alleviate the salt stress that experienced. So we built a model to link the competition processes and also the feedback between plants and the soil to simulate if the salinity elevation by the biomass by the plants. And we found, we simulated the distribution, the biomass distribution of each dominant species across the salinity gradient with and without their neighboring species. Here is what we found by comparing the biomass difference when the neighbors present or absent. We can find the interspecific interaction, that the type and the intensity of interspecific interaction. So for each of these species, each of these three species we have here, we found they are mostly competition when the environmental stress is benign. And with the increase of stress, the interspecific interaction shifted to facilitation. for each of these species, but the facilitation appear at different locations along the salinity gradient, because it's relevant to the stress tolerance of each species. And also we found the facilitation did collapse with increasing stress level, because of the stress level. Whenever the stress level is approaching the physiological tolerance limit of that species, no matter how much the stress is alleviated by other species, the increase of biomass is still very limited. And also at the community level, we found when we have like 3 interacting species, the interspecific interaction at the community level can be very diverse. But mostly at the benign conditions, it's competition, and at very stressful conditions, it's facilitation. But at intermediate stressful conditions, the interspecific interaction can either be competitive or facilitative, depend on the competitive ability and the stress tolerance of the interacting species. So it is pretty fuzzy at like medium environmental stress. And one thing we can learn here is when we try to use the facilitation as a strategy to restore some degraded marshes or other ecosystems, we need to think about the stress tolerance and the competitive ability of the interacting species to estimate what type of interspecific interaction appears at a specific stress level, and also the intensity of facilitation we can expect once the restoration was applied. And another plant attribute I want to mention is the dispersal ability of plants. This is very important when we look at some restored marshes or restored ecosystems, where we see some early arrivals colonize at first. We want to know what would be the next species, and if we have a specific species, we are interested in if that species would occur in the near future. So the dispersal ability of the species of the plants would be very important to tell us which species come first and which comes the second, and if the first arrival species can be replaced by other species. And also if the succession sequence of plants are affected by the seed bank, the availability of the seed density in that area. So to answer this question, we built a stage structured plant assembly model. In this model, we simulated this plant population dynamics across all the life cycle, with dispersal, germination, emergence, seedling establishment, and seed production. We also simulated the interspecific competition among these species, and to compare if which like a component of the attribute contribute the most to plant succession under a specific stress level. So we, based on the previous model we used to test study the interspecific interaction, we expanded the model to a special to a 2-dimensional spatial model, and we simulated the plant community dynamics across the salt gradient, and also on the different initial plant cover. The initial plant cover was used to simulate the different seed bank level or density of seeds we can expect for a restored marsh. And what we found is at very benign conditions, which is normally colonized by the most competitive species like Phragmites australis in our case of study. And whenever there's a high initial plant cover, the Phragmites, the most competitive one, can quickly take over the whole space. But whenever there's a low initial plant cover, this species, even though it will take over the whole area later on, but the whole area is firstly colonized by another species called Suella salsa, because this Suella salsa is an annual succulent that have very high dispersal ability than the Phragmites. And then with the increase of stress level, we can see we move to the habitat of another species, perennial shrub, tamarix, and then we can see it happens again, even though the tamarix is the most dominant species we observe in the field. But whenever there's the plant community start from a very low initial plant cover or seed bank density, it's always the Suella salsa take over the area the first, but it can be laterally displaced by tamarix. And then we move on to more stressful conditions, and we can see it happens again, but the speed of the time the most competitive species spend to take over the area, the whole study area, depends on the competitive ability of it, and also depends on the dispersal ability of other species. And under the most stressful conditions, that is dominated by Suella salsa, there's no surprise it take over the whole area at the beginning, and it lasts for the whole simulation. So what we found is kind of for stressful conditions colonized by Suella salsa, because of the because there's less species can survive in very stressful conditions, so this species can take over the area at the beginning and last very long time. So there's no much surprise. The stress tolerance is the most important attribute that determines the plant succession sequence under stressful condition. But under benign conditions, it's more complicated. It's affected by the competitive ability of the and also the stress tolerance of interacting species, as well as as well as the dispersal ability of other species, and also the seed bank availability. So we have we draw this chart to represent the plant succession sequence under benign conditions. So whenever there's a low seed availability, the first dispersal species can take over the system initially, and then the most competitive species can gradually displace it and take over the habitat. But under whenever the seed availability is high, then the most competitive species will take over the system at the beginning. So in our simulation, we kind of didn't assume there's a different component of seed bank composition. But it can vary. We just estimate the overall seed availability as a whole. So another plant attribute I want to mention beside the competitive ability, stress tolerance, and dispersal is the it's not the plant attribute. It's the another driver is the geographic isolation. So in coastal marshes, not like other systems that have a more homogeneous environment. So coastal system is dominated by various drivers, and they have the salinity, the inundation condition, and the elevation can be governed by various processes. And sometimes these factors can act as a physical barrier for some species to disperse, especially. So I will give a case of study of an invasive species. It's called Spitana alterniflora, which is local in the United States. And this invasive species was introduced to China since 1970s and has been dispersed to most of the coastal marshes in China. And over the past several decades, I have taken over most of the low marshes in the big estuaries in China. I give the I give an idea of how this species disperse in the Yellow River Delta. What we can find is since the 2013, after its kind of extensive expansion from like 1995 to 2013, this species has stabilized, especially in low marshes. So an interesting question is if this invasive species are going to expanding more into landward and take over the habitat of other native species, or it will stay in this region. To answer this question, we did look at the physical conditions, the physical environment across the Yellow River Delta to see which physical condition, the distribution of which physical factors are most especially correlated with this invasive species. And we noticed that there's if we look at the salinity distribution, we can find there are several salt pans in high marshes because this salt pans forms because of the high evapotranspiration happens in this area and low precipitation over the summer. So when we wonder, could it be possible these salt pans prohibit the invasive species from landward dispersal? So to test this hypothesis, we transplanted the Spartina alterniflora across the from the landward to the seaward across this physical gradient, the salinity gradient, and we found that once we transplanted it into different regions, from the low marsh to the upland, we found at the high marsh, both its stem height and the biomass as well as the survival are prohibited and limited by the hypersaline condition in high marsh. And we look at the stress tolerance of this species to salinity and inundation. We look at where the mudflat, upland, and high marsh would look at along this inundation frequency and the soil salinity axis. We found the high marsh. In the high marsh, the high salinity level could greatly prohibit the growth of the Spartina alterniflora, but the mudflat where these species are currently colonized is the most suitable one for this species for it. And the upland where we worried that this species can disperse landward and take over this place is a suitable place for this invasive species to live if it's possible for it to disperse into the landward. So, so our studies shows that this salt pan here is very important to prohibit the Spartina alterniflora to disperse landward. But in coastal marshes, there are a lot of hydrological channels are built, and a lot of these construction happen to change how the water flow. It might be if there's any artificial channels that connect the low marsh or mudflat with the upland, it can act as a corridor this invasive species can use to disperse landward. So that's the lesson we learned from this study. So so I basically touched most of the attributes and the physical environment I mentioned here. And there's one more we did some study about how the plants can be affected by herbivores, especially on the extreme climate events. So that's the second part I want to introduce. So over the past decade, we observe there are a lot of studies reported in China, in the east coast of Pacific Ocean, and also the west coast of Pacific Ocean, and the west coast of the Atlantic Ocean. They reported the massive, extensive plant diebacks happened, governed by the extreme drought, and also some natural enemies of this of plants like herbivores, snails, crabs. And one common phenomenon that was observed across multiple sites is whenever this drought or the herbivore present solo, they won't cause like the plant to plant dieback. But whenever they combined, it will pose like it will cause large scale diebacks. The question is whether these two factors are interacting addictively or synergistically. So there are some studies try to study if the drought condition, how the drought affects the the physiology of the herbivore and also the behavior of the herbivore, and turn out the drought also limit the activity of herbivores, and which does not explain why we saw like these two factors are posing a life-threatening stress to plants. But this is very important to be answered because there are a lot of marsh restoration projects try to plant the dominant species once plant dieback happens. If we do not know how and why these two factors interact and cause like deadly threat for plants, it will be, the restoration project might, not succeed. And here we propose a hypothesis, that is, we took use of the phenotypic plasticity of marsh plants to understand how the population can be resilient to various external disturbance like environmental disturbance or the demographic disturbance from herbivores. So here the photo shows one of the species in Yellow River Delta. It's called Sweater salsa. And we collected this species in August, and we found the size of the species can be very various. It can be very shrubby whenever there's no neighboring, plants around, and it can also be very dwarf whenever there's very like a dense like neighbors around it. So we propose this hypothesis that for plant population, at the end of growing season, the population density and the individual biomass of each biomass can be located on either point along this dash line. It can be very densely populated, but each individual can be small, or it can be like very scarce, but each individual can be very big. And whenever the demographic disturbance happens over the growing season, it will decrease the density of the population, but each individual experience less intraspecific competition, so it can grow bigger and it can be more productive. So as long as the population located along this line, it might keep like a decent population size if this line have a slope of -1. And whenever there's a environmental stress, it will push this dashed line leftwards, so it will affect the intrinsic growth rate of each individual. And so even though there's like even though the population density is still the same, but each individual can be the growth of each individual can be suppressed. So it will have a smaller size and less fertile compared to the benign conditions. So to test if this hypothesis, oh, I forgot that. So whether this dashed line are shifting leftward parallelly or like leaned leftwards or rightwards will affect if the environmental disturbance and the demographic disturbance would interact synergically or antigenically. So synergically means if the whole line was pushed leftwards, but with demographic disturbance, this line would kind of lean leftwards. So you will expect smaller individual size and less smaller individual size and less population density. So we did an experiment to test this in the Yellow River Delta. What we found is from the high marsh to the low marsh, there's an increase of inundation, which is a stress for this species. This line shifted leftwards with like from the high marsh to mid marsh and low marsh, and it also kind of leaned leftwards. So which means there's a synergy between the demographic disturbance and the physical environmental stress. And we also look into the interspecific interaction. And we found in high marsh there's a whenever this interspecific interaction is negative, it's competition, and if it's positive, then it's a facilitation. So at high marsh, we see mostly competition, and the competition increased with the population density. But in mid marsh and low marsh, there's basically no interaction. The interaction is basically either slightly negative whenever there's a high density level, or it can be positive at a low marsh where there's the stress level is higher. So the decreasing interspecific interaction with the physical stress explains the synergic effect of behavior disturbance and extreme climate. What we can use for we can take from this study is when we try to replant some species after degradation, we need to consider we need to determine the density of the plants we want to plant according to the physical stress. The more physical stress, the more the higher the density should be. So the last part I want to mention is the response of plant community to sea level rise. I did my previous postdoc in George Washington University, and we studied the response of Chesapeake Bay marshes to sea level rise there. So with sea level rise, there's the forests that are retreating landward, and we also see some ghost forests appear in this area, and also salt intrusion into agriculture land, and flooding happens in the countryside. One question we're interested in is, with sea level rise, what kind of land cover would transform to marsh that hold a high diversity level, and it's very crucial to protect the landward. So we did a land cover analysis of a coastal county in Maryland called Somerset, and we analyzed the transition of land cover from 2009 to 2017. What we found is so the land cover that transition to marsh is mostly agriculture land, and some scrub shrub wetlands, and also forest. And agricultural land takes the most part of it. So could it be so if we can apply this study to other regions, can we do some like a reward? Can we give some reward to the farmers to ask them to release the agricultural land that might be potentially affected by salt intrusion, to gain more marshes, and also for the marshes that was lost over this time period, it mostly transitioned to water. So the inundation of marshes is a phenomenon we observed in this site. This is a photo that was taken. There's no time. That was taken like in 2015. So before storm, in the above, and after storm. So and you can already see some of this marsh has already transitioned to open water. We call it pond, or some even call it pools. And with the inundation of the marshes, we are losing a lot of function it can provide, service it can provide. And the most important is the blue carbon it is stored. So in like Louisiana, there are like over 4,000 square kilometers marshes had lost over the past decades. And in Chesapeake Bay, we are experiencing much slight effect of sea level rise than the Louisiana, but we already see some of the marshes are starting to be inundated and be drowned and transition to open area over the past decades. And one action that has been taken to keep the lost marshes longer, so we can it can provide service longer, is lift the elevation of these degraded marshes to buffer the sea level rise. So this what is done is there's we take some sediment dredged from nearby channels or tidal creeks to fill these marshes and elevate its elevation to be safe for sea level rise. And one question is, one phenomenon we found is once the plant dieback happens, the marsh can lose its elevation very rapidly within 1 or 2 years. So the elevation can drop by 20 to 50 centimeters with a couple of years. And if we have this a given amount of sediment, and if we can identify these potentially endangered marshes that would transfer to ponds earlier, then we can apply this sediment across a large area. So we do not need to lift like the elevation by 20 centimeters or 50 centimeters if we can notice this marsh that is are going to be joined in the future. So that is with that idea, we conducted some study to identify if there's like early warning signals before this pond forms. This is how this marshes looks like once it's joined. And we identify some early some ponds, open water that is at its early stage of formation. And we studied the plant community, the special temperature change of plant community composition, and also the elevation in this area. What we found is from so this blue area is where the marsh has already turned to ponds, and we started from the buffer zone to the pond about the plant cover of each individual species we found. And we found from the buffer zone to the pond, there's a transition of plant community from flood intolerant species to flood tolerant species. So plants do adapt to flooding before it turns to be before dieback happens. And temporarily, we started like whether the transition between flood intolerant species, flood intolerant plant community and flood tolerant plant community, as well as the water. And what we found is if we divide the whole ponding area into cold region, landward side, like it's facing landward, and the seaward side, we found the cold region. In the cold region, both flood intolerant species and flood tolerant species are transitioned to be, transition to water. But at the landward buffer, only the flood tolerant species is increasing and the flood intolerant species decreasing, which means the plant is adapting to the hydrological stress. But at the seaward buffer, we see an opposite phenomenon. The flood tolerant species is decreasing, but flood intolerant species is increasing, which seems kind of a little bit anti our intuition. And we found this might be because of the tidal incision that occurred in this region. So with sea level rise, the tidal creek also incites landward, and the incision would release some of this area around it to get better drained. So that would be the phenomenon we could expect in other regions also. So we apply these fundings to Deal Island in Maryland, because there's a local a project run by United States Army Corps of Engineering to restore the marshes and lift the elevation. And one other question is why the ponds we found in this area is mostly located in the interior part of the marsh. So low-lying elevation might be one of the reasons we found. So the elevation in the interior part is lower than the exterior part. But if there's any other reasons like the drainage condition, because interior part of the marsh is less drained compared to the exterior part. So we did a study to study if the drainage condition could be another reason that contribute to interior marsh to be pond. So we installed groundwater well into interior marsh that are under different stage of degradation. And they also have different elevation. And we also installed groundwater well at the tidal creek. And then we compared the hydro period and how the hydro period changed with elevation, both at the interior part of the marsh and the exterior part of the marsh. What we found is in the interior part of the marsh, a slight change of elevation from like a 0.4 meter to 0.2 meter would make a big difference. The hydro period would increase sharply, much sharper than the exterior part of the marsh, which means with sea level rise, the interior marsh are giving like a narrow window opportunity to adapt to the increase in hydro period. So that would be the one reason why the interior marsh is inundated the most compared to the exterior part of the marsh. And one other interesting phenomenon we found in the marsh is there's a very flood tolerant species junkers are forming like a plant island in some ponded area like this, and this marsh are transformed from this other like Spitana pattern dominant or spartan alternate flora dominant marshes to the open water. And what we found interesting is here we selected several sites and we compared the distribution of junkers, which is outlined in green. And we compared its distribution over the years, and we found even though the neighboring species, either spartan patterns or spartan alternate flora, died, this species is very robust and it lasts longer than the other species. So the question would be, why this species is so stable, and also how resilient it is to ponding. Because with ponding, the marsh loses elevation, and could this like a ponded area still be suitable, or is not suitable for this species to disperse spatially? And then and also could this species be the hope to prolong the lifespan of marsh if we can kind of fasten its dispersal and yeah, try to help it to colonize more area. So we did a transplanting experiment to study both how these species are affected by hydrological suppression in like a ponded area with elevated marsh base and also non-elevated one. And we also transplanted into dieback where the elevation still keeps but the plant dies. And we also transplanted to healthy patches, so it's colonized by other species to see if these species are limited by the interspecific competition. So here's the result. We found whenever it's transplanted to the ponds, if we elevate the marsh, it can grow well, but if we do not elevate, it will die. So the pit crabs in pond do inhabit these species to colonize new areas in the pond. And also the dieback regions is a suitable habitat these species can take use, but dieback regions would hold long before the pit collapse happens. So there's a very narrow window opportunity for this species to colonize. And for the healthy patches, there's a strong competition from other species that this species in experience. So could it be possible that is there any way we can kind of decrease this interspecific competition by removing the other species and allow these species to disperse faster? So that will be something we can think about in the future to prolong the lifespan of marshes. So some take-home message is the plant distributions are governed by stress tolerance, compatibility, environmental heterogeneity, grazers, and intimate interaction among them. And also phenotypic plasticity of marsh plants do help understand population resilience in responding to environmental stress and demographic disturbance. Also, the landward migration of marshes can compensate marsh erosion or inundation caused by sea level rise if there's no physical barriers. Also, the spatial temporal dynamics of marsh plant community composition can be used as an indicator of early warning signals of marsh degradation. And also the heterogeneity of elevation and the drainage condition across the marsh platforms could result in different window of opportunity for marsh plant to adapt to new environmental conditions, and also could result in different resilience. So that's the end of my talk, and I want to thank for the grants that's for these studies and my collaborators. And I'm good to take any questions.
Round of virtual applause, I guess, from everyone. Thanks very much, Juan. There was a very interesting talk and a little bit of a trip around the world of salt marshes. I'm pretty sure there will be questions. So if people have a question, please raise your hand or write in the chat. And I think for the time being, you could stop sharing the screen. Yes, very good. Mm-hmm. Perfect. So, any questions? If not, maybe I can start with a quick question.
Yeah.
looking at your example of the ponding in the marshes in the Chesapeake Bay, I was wondering whether you've considered whether distance to the channel plays a role in sediment availability.
Yes, they do. So the further you go into the interior part of the marsh, the lower sediment loads the plants can capture. So that is one thing that has been mentioned a lot. The low marsh accrete faster than the interior marsh. That is also why we see the interior part of the marsh is low lying than the actual part of the marsh.
I vaguely seem to remember, yeah, one of the studies that looked into that. So yeah, thanks. Gillian.
Hello, sorry, I joined a little bit late, so you may have talked about this and I may have missed it. But I was interested in when I saw the Mississippi, the images from Louisiana.
Yeah.
There, I mean, how much of the problem of the loss of the marsh would be caused by the fact that there's not much in the way of sediment coming or being allowed to get into the marsh from the river, with it being sort of canalized with the levees and things? And is that the same sort of problem that you have up in Washington, where the sediment is being diverted away from the delta?
Yeah, so there are some studies talk about that. So they took like 3 estuaries in Louisiana, and one estuary have dams built it along the river that cut off the sediment budget. And they do found whenever the sediment budget is cut, the marsh do lost faster than the other regions. So sediment budget is very crucial to for marsh stability whenever there's sea level rise. And also, I think in Louisiana, not only sea level rise is the main driver, but also the land subsidization, because of the gas exploration and groundwater, usage in that area can contribute to the relative high sea level rise than the other region. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Yeah, Jonathan.
Hi, hello. I also missed the start of your talk, so I apologize if you covered this as well. From one of your slides, you had a picture of what looked like material being pumped onto the marsh.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could just say a little bit more about that. Is that material that has come from dredging activities, or is it being redistributed from elsewhere within the same intertidal system? And how appropriate is that a method of building marshes?
Yeah, so the sediment that used is dredged from nearby rivers. So it's like a reuse of the sediment to the surrounding marshes. And whenever the sediment was applied in the marsh, they do find there's a short times of barren period, so the marsh looks totally barren. But after 1 or 2 years, they pops out, the plants pop out, and it do perform well. As you know, there's seed banks there. So there are some reports given by USGS analyze how this action can help the marsh to adapt to the sea level rise with a high elevation.
Great, thank you. Are there any further questions? I mean, I could talk for another half an hour with you, that's no problem, but maybe we can do that another time over coffee. So if there are no further questions, then thanks very much again for telling us more about your previous work. Do you want to have a very quick sort of shout out about what you're planning or what you're doing in Oxford now?
Oh yeah, so in Oxford, I I started looking more into the population level. So in my current lab, we do a lot of study of demographic models and analyze the life history, such strategies, and how the life history can evolve on the changing climate. And I think that is the methodology I want to apply in coastal marshes, because as a plant community ecologist, I pay less attention into how this life history would change and how it can adapt to like extreme climate events. That is what we observe in the field already. Like in some years there's like extreme like dry spring, and it can like prohibit one life history of this of a plant. So that is something I want to apply in coastal marshes. And also I try to use the phenotypic stability of plants as early warning signals of population population resilience in response to like physical stress, because like considering normally plants are very self-sustaining, right? So they would produce a lot of seeds and rameses, and only like a very short percentage of that would survive to the end of the growing season. So I want to use that phenotypic plasticity of plants at early warning signal. And also I'm looking for positions, either like faculty position or postdoc positions in the future. So probably my current contract would end in 6 months. Though we're thinking about how to extend my contract in Oxford, but I'm also open to like look at new positions.
If anyone hears anything, please forward it to us or to Manchi directly. I'm pretty sure, there are some interesting positions out there that maybe you haven't heard about yet, or fellowship opportunities or something. Great. Yeah, thanks very much again. And thanks everyone for joining us. Next month, I think it's the 2nd of February. Let me double check. Yes, 2nd of November. We'll have Susanna Swirat from the Polish Academy of Sciences, and her research is, as far as I understand it, more on geomorphology and rocky coast. So I'm looking forward to that. Switch from salt marshes again. We will upload today's presentation to our YouTube channel as usual, and looking forward to see you next month then. Bye everyone.
See you next month.
Bye.